President Carter pledged the utmost in cooperation in the transition that will take place.
I will always be grateful. Can hardly believe it, but it's sinking in now, the enormity of what has taken place. Peaceful election, eventually a peaceful transfer of power.
I accept tonight the responsibility that you have given me to be the leader of this, the greatest country in human history.
I have a lot to be thankful for tonight. I'm thankful for America and thankful that we are able to resolve our electoral differences in a peaceful way. This peaceful transfer of power is one of the hallmarks of a true democracy.
President Carter, President Bush Sr., as well as the current president have all been very gracious and offered to provide any help that they can in this transition process.
We are now all rooting for his success in uniting and leading the country. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I recently confirmed that on numerous occasions, the intelligence community incidentally collected information about U.S. citizens involved in the Trump transition. Details about U.S. persons associated with the incoming administration, details with little or no apparent foreign intelligence value, were widely disseminated in intelligence community reporting. Third, I have confirmed that additional names of Trump transition team members were unmasked. And fourth and finally, I want to be clear, none of this surveillance was related to Russia or the investigation of Russian activities or of the Trump team.
If what was said in this dossier, the central thesis of the dossier was Carter Page, a Trump campaign associate, is a Russian, basically, asset. And the critical mass in the dossier, in the Steele dossier, was it said Carter Page went to Russia, met with these two guys, Russian oligarchs, and the Steele dossier said at that meeting, Carter Page, a member of the Trump campaign, negotiated an agreement whereby he would get 10 to 15% of Rosneft, which is like the biggest gas firm in Russia, in exchange for his cooperation to work on behalf of the Russians to get better agreements from the Americans when Donald Trump's elected. Now, I told Devin, I said, if that's true, he's a Russian agent, the FISA was righteous, and a lot of people are gonna have a lot of problems. But I also said, if that's false, they're screwed. If the Steele dossier were true, the Russians were gonna pay this guy $12 billion. Like, okay, open up a bank account, where's this guy gonna move his money? Turns out they had nothing to back up their claims.
Cash had gotten FISAs before, so he knew they had done something really corrupt in order to get that warrant.
We were collecting our documents, we were talking to the FBI, we were talking to DOJ, and they told us, they said, look, you guys are charged with looking into Russian active measures. You should know that this is how we surveilled a certain individual who we thought had ties to the Trump campaign. And we were like, what? And then we went and read it, and having done FISAs myself, I was like, this might be one of the worst documents I've ever seen.
The FISA warrant process has to be followed carefully, and it matters because the warrants are issued ex parte. Here's what I mean. Imagine you're being sued, and you don't know you're being sued, and you can't have a lawyer to defend you in court, and then you found out you just lost a lawsuit. There's not an American who would say that's the most unfair process I've ever heard in my life, and he would say that's the FISA court process. You're being essentially sued in court, and you're not allowed to have a lawyer, and you're not allowed to even know that you're being sued. You're not allowed to look at any of the information being used against you, and you just lost, because now they have a FISA warrant and they can just do whatever they want. That goes against everyone's fundamental sense of fairness as a person. Now, the reason, of course, you don't tell the person you're about to spy on them is because you think they're a terrorist, and if you tell them we're spying on you, obviously they'll change. The compromise or the deal with the devil was supposed to be that in exchange for not giving the person the due process rights that go back to the Magna Carta, that just go back to your holy book of choice, the idea that if you're accused, you're allowed to face your accusers. You have this in every major religious tradition. The deal with the devil, though, is that everything will be meticulously audited, it'll be reviewed, everything will be truthful, everything will be bulletproof. That procedure, of course, wasn't followed.
We now know the dossier was used in the FISA. So we had shredded the credibility of the dossier. And then once we found out it was in the FISA, we couldn't tell anyone yet. Once those two merged, I said, Devin, this is insane that this document was used to go up on a surveillance warrant of an American citizen.
The second part of that FISA is even worse, and that is that they ran spies even before they got a FISA warrant into the Trump campaign. Governments paid United States taxpayers paying for spies to spy on a political campaign, before you even get a FISA warrant. And then not only that, it's exculpatory evidence that they don't even tell the court about.
It was the first time they applied for the application to spy on Americans. The FISA court judge said, it sounds like you want to spy on political operatives. And the application was denied.
They knew Christopher Steele was leaking to the State Department and news media because they had the State Department's documents. That's derogatory information. They didn't tell the court that. They knew that Carter Page was an asset for the CIA, not a stooge for the Russians. They didn't tell the court that. They knew that George Papadopoulos and Carter Page had made statements of innocence, not knowing they were being recorded by the undercover informant Stefan Halper. They don't tell the court that, even though it's in the book, it's in the manual, the FBI manual. It's what you got to do.
So now they've begun this giant web. And if Carter Page or George Papadopoulos had contacted me, Stephen Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, or anybody else within the campaign, it's very likely that all of those people were also being listened to. That unmasking also occurred on literally the day Donald Trump was sworn in as the 45th president of the United States, and they unmasked the Trump children, who clearly they were also listening to.
I knew that I was unmasked, that we were targeted. It was sort of assumed that we were targeted. And I always say, hey, listen, I don't think it would be any stretch of the imagination to say that I, the son of the President of the United States, duly elected, but as a civilian, as a citizen, as someone who worked on a campaign, was the number 2 target of the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people.
So I'm Generation X, and some kind of significant meme that surfaced before we called them memes was 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. This is pre-social media. The idea would be, how many connections would it take you to get to a world-famous celebrity? Well, the reason I bring up 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon is because to spy on the Trump campaign, the FBI used the 3-jump rule.
In these FISA warrants, when you surveil one party, you have what is known as a 2-jump rule. You not only get to spy on Carter Page, but you get 2 jumps, or as the Obama administration would have it, 3 jumps from Carter Page, the surveilled person.
You don't even need 3 jumps. 2 jumps get you everywhere you want to be within the campaign, as long as you have like a network node.
Having wiretapped Carter Page, you can now wiretap Steve Bannon. Corey Lewandowski then talks to Trump. You've got a 3rd jump, so now you're wiretapping everyone. So that's what they were trying to do, figuring if they could get into the Trump campaign, somewhere there would be a crime.
January 17, the dossier comes out. March, April, we start our investigation. Summertime, we're cranking on document production and collating a list of witnesses we're going to interview. Fall, hit the home run with the Fusion clowns and figure out who paid for the dossier. So now we're in September, October, going into the holidays. And we had finally also at this time started interviewing witnesses. And in December, we got Andy McCabe. When we asked Andy McCabe, could you have gotten the FISA application against Carter Page without the Steele dossier? And he said no. And I think we ended up doing 65 interviews. We hit everybody, former attorneys generals, Loretta Lynch, Sally Yates, Andy McCabe, James Comey. You know, the central thesis was the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government to hijack the election. Okay, let's find out. So we came up with the 3C questions we were gonna ask every single witness. Do you have any evidence or information that the Trump campaign colluded, conspired, or coordinated with any member of the Russian government, with any member of the Trump campaign or Trump presidency? And all 65 witnesses under oath said no to every question. We had to ask that because they were saying it in the media that happened, so these principals were the ones who would have to know that. And if they answered yes, we'd have to report that to the public. And they couldn't just answer a simple question of, where's the dirt?
Reviewing the evidence that I have, I don't think you can conclude that at all.
We had not one person claim that they had or had seen evidence of Trump colluding with the Russians. Not a single one of them could cite any evidence whatsoever that they saw. That's what was going on behind closed doors. Then on TV, you go there and you see Schiff come out and talking about how, you know, more treason has been revealed by Trump.
All you have right now is a circumstantial case.
Actually, no, Chuck. I can tell you that the case is more than that, and I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now.
Then there was also the private world of people that we would have to interview as well. The Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign. The CrowdStrike thing was a big deal. Podesta, as the head of the campaign, or whatever his role was, had hired this company to do a scrub of their internal services to be like, who's in our stuff, what happened, how did this go down, which is a reasonable thing to do when you get hacked. What's an unreasonable and made up thing to do is then falsely tie it to the wrong person or country or actor. Normally what would happen in this type of hack is the FBI would come in and have our experts scrub the servers. The DNC hired CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike was in full control, and James Comey has publicly admitted this, of what servers the FBI had access to. So the FBI was only given limited access, whatever the DNC chose. So those were the only servers they were ever able to look at. And this is why you have the disconnect that they've been saying continuously, that the DNC was hacked. It was Podesta's email that was hacked. Nobody knows to this day what actually happened because the FBI has never looked at the entirety of the servers from the DNC, and they can turn those over anytime they wanted to, but they won't because they know it won't be good for them.
White House today. President Trump fires FBI Director James Comey. It's only the second time in history that a president has fired the head of the Bureau.
I think the insurance policy morphed over time. I think initially the insurance policy was, we're going to do this investigation, we're going to get after the president, we're going to spy on his campaign. They did all that. Donald Trump and the American people surprised all of them, and President Trump wins. When he wins, the insurance policy becomes, wow, we got to make sure they don't find out what we did. And who better to find that out? Michael Flynn. So they go after Michael Flynn. Once they get him gone, they think they're fine until Jim Comey gets fired, because Jim Comey was traveling into the next administration too. When he gets fired, then the insurance policy morphs again and it becomes, Shazam, we got to do something now. We've lost Comey, we've lost our man. So what does Comey do? Leaks his memos to get a special counsel appointed, and who better than his best pal, Bob Mueller, to run it for 2 years. That's how the insurance policy morphed over time.
Robert Mueller, it was mid-May, I think, wants his old job back. He's out to pasture. Clearly he's losing his cognitive capacity, but he thinks, or his buddies think, that he can come back to direct the FBI like he did before. And why is that important? Because if Mueller, who's good buddies with Comey, with Weissman, with all of these Trump-hating, anti-American, Democrat cabal operatives, if they can get Bob, their buddy, back at the Hoover Building, he can just shred it all. He can make all the evidence disappear. Operation Crossfire Hurricane against Mike Flynn, everything else will just be deep-sixed. So Mueller is escorted to the White House by Rod Rosenstein, his friend. Rod Rosenstein, arch, deep state swamp creature, is in fact running Donald Trump's Department of Justice, because Jeff's just removed himself. President meets with Robert Mueller out of professional courtesy, realizes within minutes, sorry, you can't even string a coherent sentence. You don't represent making America great again. Your old school establishment, you're past your sell-by date. Thank you very much. No thanks. Less than 24 hours later, the guy who's really running the DOJ, Rod Rosenstein, makes his friend, Robert Mueller, the most powerful man in the world. He makes him special counsel, special prosecutor, who has the power to bring down the president.
Mueller should never have taken the job. He was compromised, he was conflicted, and it was the appointment arose, it flowed from an illegal act by his friend James Comey, the release of those files. And it was part of a coup. And when he came on board, he could have known and should have known that there was nothing to investigate. And he should have shut it down. Instead, he harassed the president for years. And then they have this extraordinary raid on Manafort's home where they go in and start taking pictures of his suits to prove that he was buying expensive suits and outside his regular income. It's completely absurd. They're investigating Russia and they nail Manafort on mortgage fraud and having expensive suits.
They know that there's nothing there. Comey and McCabe know that they have done bad things. And the special counsel's investigation now is a way of trying to cover their tracks. And they've got their buddies in there, and they're trying their best to cover for them. And hopefully they will get one wrong thing so that they can make a splash and all of their crimes will be forgotten.
We were pretty careful because we didn't want to step over any lines, and it ends up the corruption is just far worse than even we could have imagined, and we imagined it was pretty bad. When the Nunes memo came out, we thought the whole thing's over. This blows up. It's the end of Mueller. It's the end of the investigation, and the investigators need to be investigated.
Before it was published, they were all saying that Nunes is reckless. This is extremely damaging to national security. The FBI, the DOJ is going to suffer all kinds of negative consequences. Informants are going to be outed. Everybody's going to die. Nunes is killing everybody is the best way I can sum up the narrative that they had going for him back then. Then once the thing actually came out, it was clear that, look, man, there's no national security threats in people finding out that they used the Steele dossier to get a warrant to spy on Carter Page. So then at that point, the narrative shift to it was a nothing burger. There was nothing in this, all the hoopla over this, okay, so they used these unconfirmed allegations to spy on an American citizen. What's the big deal? Carter Page is a weird guy anyway, and so I'm sure he deserved it. What's the big deal? We had information in there revealing that Comey and McCabe had testified to us that the agents, the FBI agents who interviewed Michael Flynn, did not think he was lying. We had that in our report and it was redacted. And at the time that our report came out, Comey was going around on a book tour on the country and saying that he didn't know anything about that.
How is it ethical to brief the President of the United States on an unverifiable and salacious dossier? And how is it ethical leadership to not tell him that his political opposition, Hillary Clinton, paid for that?
Shortly after that was when Schiff came out with his counter memo, the Schiff memo, in which he argued that everything in the memo we said was false, that there were no problems whatsoever in the FISA warrant on Carter Page, nothing wrong with the dossier, everything's good, the FBI and DOJ did everything right, Nunes doesn't know what he's talking about, he just made all this stuff up. So they have these two dueling memos, but when the Schiff memo came out, that was championed by the media as the definitive debunking of the Nunes memo. All this stuff that Schiff said is true because Schiff said it.
Devin Nunes was subject to such scorn for saying the conclusions that we brought forth in that report, which all proved to be true. The Mueller investigation had to acknowledge them. Today, the Department of Justice acknowledges them. And they certainly contradict all of the national media narrative that we all had to live with for over a year.
After the IG report came out, I would have thought there would be some kind of, little media frenzy, asking Schiff if he stands by his memo.
Look in the camera and say they hacked John Podesta's emails. We know for a fact that Putin's government did that. You can't, and you know you can't, and you're hiding behind weasel words.
I just said that
Say they hacked John Podesta's emails.
Russians, I'm not going to be specific as to
because you don't know it, that's why. All right.
He would constantly say, I have seen evidence of collusion and conspiracy, the questions we were asking. We did it for a reason. And we would go to him and his staff and said, okay, are you seeing something we're not? Because if you are, we'd like to know. But he knew he could just say it on TV, on certain organizations, and then hide behind, well, it's all classified, I can't get into it. They went straight back to attacking us personally, the media and the left. So there were more attacks on Devin and me. We would always say we're over the target when the ass clowns in the media on the left were just shelling us at the same time. And we knew that was coming the second we hit send, and it came hard.
The story in the V came out when?
The cocaine yachts prostitute story? The most absolutely outlandish stories about Devin, and it would be so ridiculous, things that would absolutely defy belief. He was a dumb farmer, he's corrupt, and we were seeing very early on these accusations that he was a Putin stooge, which really stood out to us because the guy, his entire career, he's been a Russia hawk. And there was, for example, a giant billboard on our main highway in the district back home. You had analysts talking on MSNBC speculating whether the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee is actually a Russian asset. Some person filed the California equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act against Devin's wife, who's an elementary school teacher, to get all of her work emails.
They started going after his family, and that's just absurd and totally off limits, and writing crazy things on social media and in articles.
I was not just stalked by the fake and phony press who would hang out right outside this office and follow me everywhere they went.
For Best Supporting Actor in working with the Trump administration and going to meet with them on the investigation.
I also had these big picture fake news stories.
This was going on both at the national level, in the pages of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the local level back home.
The media had gone wild. They had been writing crazy stories about everybody, including myself, which was unheard of at the time, to write about a staffer, leak his name, call him basically a genocidal dictator.
Cash, they kind of portray it as this sort of Machiavellian genius behind what the hipsy Republicans were doing. A guy nobody should be listening to.
They knew that Cash was the one that was giving us the roadmap.
I remember a specific circumstance where Rod Rosenstein was confronted with the fact that he had signed renewal for this FISA warrant. And he turned to Kash Patel and said to Kash that if this did not stop, if the criticism of Rosenstein persisted, if the efforts to call him to account for that signature were elevated, that it might be Kash himself that would be subject of surveillance of our government.
It used to be politicians launched grenades at each other, and that was considered warfare, and fair enough, all's fair. You beat me, I beat you. We run dirty ads, but now we're getting down to destroying the reputations of individual people.
At its core, this was an information operation, an information warfare operation. It was designed to get out a specific narrative, and that narrative in this case was that Trump is a traitor and he was colluding with the Russians.
The bigger problem is the reporting that the same group of circus animals is conducting is not true. It's not accurate.
In having conversations with reporters as they were continuing to play this story out in the national media, we would explain to them that if you go into a classified briefing and you receive classified information and you step out and you tell reporters that information, you have committed a crime. If you go to that same classified briefing and step out and lie about what happened, you've not committed a crime. So the reporters should be suspect. They should question whether or not this person really is committing a crime, or whether or not they're just spinning them and giving them the information that they want to have reported.
I honestly think most at some point would say, you know what, why bother? I just retire from Congress, just go do something else, have a quiet life where, I don't got to deal with this nonsense every single day. But that's just not Devin's nature. His nature is, when you're punched, always punch back. And I think that was always his instinct through this whole thing. I mean, he can't be bullied and he can't be intimidated. And at its root, that is what the whole media operation against him was trying to achieve.
biggest misconception about Devin Nunes is that the memo he released was a hoax, when in fact Adam Schiff's memo was a hoax. They attack Devin Nunes for the Nunes memo based on what Adam Schiff said. And if you're an honest person, you would say, well, how could you just say the Democrat wrote a memo, the Republican wrote a memo, all politicians lie, they're both probably full of shit. I would be okay with that. We know that Adam Schiff claimed that he had evidence of Russian collusion, and he's never called out for any of that. But if you're a Republican making those kind of claims, you would never live them down. The media's role in the Russiagate hoax is complex because what we had suspected was proven, ironically, of all places, in the Mueller report. The Mueller report showed how the information laundering works. Someone within the FBI leaks something to Michael Isikoff or David Korn or someone at the Washington Post. That person at the Washington Post writes an article based on the leak, and then the FBI goes and says, look, we have this story about this thing, which means this thing must be true. And then the FBI takes action on that, and then the information goes back to the Washington Post. That's how the information laundering cycle works. Now, boom, #1 story. CNN's reporting that this dossier exists and it contains scandalous information. Who knows if it's true or not? It's salacious. There's a whole big if true thing. Does Trump pee on prostitutes? Well, I mean, how do you know that he didn't, right? I can't say for certainty that he didn't. Oh, so now people are like, oh, Trump peed on prostitutes. I can't believe this. It was all, of course, a big hoax. But that's how you launder that information, and you get a document that is based on fabrications into the news cycle.
For me, going into House Intelligence Committee, it's supposed to be sort of a closed-door meeting. I'm there voluntarily cooperating, trying to help. I believe I was in there for 9 hours straight. And I got done, it was about 7:30 at night. I walk out the building, I finally get my phone back, open up Twitter, and I'm looking. 11:30. Don Jr. said this. It's supposed to be, behind closed doors, and literally at every bathroom break, someone's leaking to CNN what's going on in the room. Like, why would anyone voluntarily go in there and try to work with them to get answers, knowing that they have no intention of trying to deal in good faith?
We're entering into a new era of information warfare. But the information warfare that most scares me is the very tactics that our Defense Intelligence Agency, our CIA, our NSA have used for years to create misinformation and propaganda, the ability to create false reality on social media, in news organizations. They've now been turned inward on the American people. Somebody created a false illusion of sophisticated, extraordinary capabilities. The idea that you're going to take a document that says Carter Page is a CIA asset helping the American public and change it to say, no, he's a Russian stooge, and fake a court with that, fake the Congress with that. That's how far the FBI went. That is information warfare. That's misinformation at the highest levels. And I don't think the American public has come to grips with what the potential threshold we just crossed.
Legal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us.
When CNN says on air, you, the public, are not allowed to look at these, that's what we're here to do. At some point, you've got to say, wow, you got some big balls to stand up on national television and tell the entire world, don't read this, I'll read it to you. I have personal friends who are reporters or who are in like neoconservative or neoliberal fields who genuinely still believe this stuff. They still believe it because their jobs, their livelihoods, their histories, their backgrounds, their resumes depend on them believing it. A lot of this will come down to the supposed fact checkers and editors in newsrooms whose names none of us know off the top of our heads. What role did they play in all of this? Isn't their job to send the bad copy back to Chris Saleza and say, we can't really put this up on the CNN website? Well, why not? Well, firstly, it's not news. It's your opinion. And secondly, it's a mental opinion. It doesn't bear anything close to reality. What are you doing? Please don't send me anything like this again.
Police your own industry. There should be real journalists that stand up and say, this is a phony reporter. This is an advocate. Don't listen to this person.
All those who perpetrated this false story have sat in a bunker and refused to acknowledge their wrongdoing, refused to do what they ethically, morally should have done, which is say, we got it wrong and we're sorry and we'll be better at it next time. And instead, we just moved on to another false scandal and created Ukraine, and we'll probably create another false scandal after that.
Half the time when CNN has, bombshell news, it was about me, and it was a lie. these same people, right, that told Congress, no, we didn't see anything, they literally testified under oath the exact opposite, but there's no consequence. We will go on TV day in and day out and lie to the American people to their face, and nothing's gonna happen to us.
I want to fire Robert Mueller.
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
What's your message today?
Typical New York Times fake stories.
Mr. Trump.
Go back to 2016. Trump is Hitler. Trump is Hitler. Trump is Hitler. Trump is evil. Trump represents fascism. Trump represents the rise of the new Reich or something. This was their narrative. And this wasn't something that was just put out on the internet or shouted by the Michael Moores and the Code Pinks of the world. This was high-level CNN, Washington Post, social justice crusader narratives and language that was used in the highest levels of America's media institutions.
New York's Daily News ran this front page earlier this week, Trump is Hitler.
And so then when Trump wins in a massive upset, suddenly they have a big problem, because how in their walled garden can they explain that a guy that they told all of their people was the second coming of Hitler, how could 62 million Americans vote for Hitler, right? And so they have a big problem there. How do you explain that away? Are 62 million Americans Nazis, right? No, that doesn't make any sense. Like that's a bridge too far. Then they see the Russia collusion narrative sitting right there in front of them and say, why don't we just say that he cheated? So in their movie, Trump cheated with the help of Vladimir Putin, and then that became the reason that America elected the next Adolf Hitler, and that it became useful for so many various interests. Rachel Maddow uses it to gin up her ratings, right? Because she says, we're gonna get him, we're gonna catch him, we're gonna uncover this.
Well, unfortunately, until this is released, I can't comment on the underlying documents, but I can say among the changes that I thought were notable,
instead of some, smoking gun that was always promised, it's classified, you can't see it, right? That was the game they played until Rick Grenell blew that one up. Maybe these guys just actually believe that collusion is real and they're operating in good faith. In reality, that wasn't the goal. The goal was never to prove collusion. The goal was always indictments, convictions, and then impeachment. And that was the goal from the very start of all of it.
This is exclusive CNN video. This is what happened this morning before sunrise, just before 6 a.m., when Roger Stone, longtime Trump associate and advisor, was taken into custody by the FBI.
On the morning of January 25th, 25 heavily armed FBI agents in full SWAT gear and brandishing assault weapons arrived at my home at 6 o'clock in the morning in 17 armored vehicles. There was an FBI helicopter overhead. I lived on a canal, so there were 2 amphibious units that pulled up to the dock with frogmen who were also armed. Then they dragged my wife out of the house in her night clothing and bare feet so she could share my humiliation for the CNN cameras. Now, CNN's cameras, we know from the security footage, shows that the CNN camera showed up exactly 14 minutes before the FBI. This would make it the shortest journalistic stakeout in American history. I think, as most people know, I was targeted for a political prosecution because of my longtime support and friendship for the president.
Stone says he has been encouraging Donald Trump to run for president since 1988.
I would say that I would have a hell of a chance of winning. Between his outspokenness, his national name identification, and his issue positions, he could be a formidable candidate.
The indictment against me came up with nothing. They pasted together a very flimsy indictment for lying to Congress, even though the misstatements I made when I went voluntarily to the House Intelligence Committee were immaterial. They hid no underlying crimes. It was a Soviet-style show trial.
As I have always said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
I was in Congress for 30 hours. I was the target because it would generate headlines. I'm sure there's an element of stress on my father that, hey, they're putting your kid through this. I mean, don't forget, it wasn't like they're saying, hey, we want to find out. You had the former vice presidential candidate of the United States for the Democrat Party, Tim Kaine, Schiff, saying that I committed treason. Treason is a crime punishable by death.
Can you imagine carrying that weight and that burden as a president, knowing that they're trying to go after your child and thinking in some way, hey, look, they're going after my son because I'm president. Do you ever think maybe at night you say to yourself, gosh, is this worth it? They're targeting my family and trying to destroy them and going after your children.
President Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., was back on Capitol Hill this week to talk about his much-discussed Trump Tower meeting with a Russian lawyer who promised him damaging political info during the 2016 campaign.
And he's a father with, 5 children having to hear about this from their friends, listen to it, in school, see it in the paper, on television at night. It's such a scary thing to see, and your heart breaks. When they tell you they want to put you in prison for life or treason punishable by death. Can you imagine when you hear this or you see this about, your father?
My biggest regret of the last 4 years was not being more vocal about what they did to General Flynn. I just said, man, there must be something here if this many people that run these institutions, I still had faith as an American in these institutions. And it was the most misguided faith I've ever had in anything in my life.
Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn thought he would walk out of court free after a sentencing hearing yesterday.
A packed courtroom was stunned as Judge Emmett Sullivan said he could not hide his disgust and his disdain for Flynn's crimes.
At first, I thought he was trying to do everything he could to get General Flynn to scream out, "I'm not guilty." He threw out the word treason, and he said you arguably sold out your country while you were in the White House. I mean, it was just a breathtaking, excoriating dialogue. I was stunned, and he even paused after his tirade for an hour while the media runs wild internationally with calls of General Flynn having committed treason. The pressure on a criminal defendant, particularly in a federal case, is beyond anybody's capacity to comprehend unless you've been there. They threatened to indict Michael Flynn, the son, if General Flynn did not immediately enter a guilty plea. Young Michael Flynn had just had a baby. He had a 4-month-old little boy. He had done nothing wrong. He had been forced to sell his house to pay legal fees. They threatened to indict him just around Thanksgiving and to indict Michael too. They just wanted to stop the pain for the whole family. They were just broken in many ways and saw no other way out. He should have never taken Flynn's guilty plea. They knew he was not an agent of Russia. They knew there was no collusion between General Flynn and anybody with Russia. We learned that they inserted into the 302 statements that he never made, things they never asked him about, to create the purported false statements. I've seen the FBI manipulate 302s before. They had done the major changes the night of February 10 after they had shown the purported transcripts of the calls with Kislyak to Vice President Pence. And then they went back that night and made changes. It was done and altered until it was approved by Andrew McCabe. If this can happen to General Michael T. Flynn, imagine what they do to anybody who has a single strike against them.
There's so much happening in this country right now that boggles the imagination, and you're at the very center of it.
If one person needs to apologize to the American people for propelling this false narrative for 30-something years, it would be Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff is the modern day Joe McCarthy. He would come out of an intelligence briefing who would say, nothing there, and he'd go, collusion, you just gotta be willing to see it. The willingness to see it is exactly what misinformation and propaganda is. If the facts aren't there and you still see it, you're delusional.
Transparency is not political, and information is power. And when individuals like the Gang of Eight are the only ones to have the information, then they go on TV and they get to say, I can't tell you, but you have to trust me. That trust has been broken because they lied to us.
The best way to clean this whole mess up is with some indictments. That's what people felt during Watergate. That's what we all should feel now if we have any sense of keeping our integrity as a country.
You know, I don't know why criminals engage in criminal behavior. I mean, we can all talk about that till we're blue in the face. The fact is they engage in seditious behavior and they ought to be prosecuted. I don't know who should go to jail. I just want a regular, serious investigation. Heck, I just want someone to be questioned, let alone prosecuted.
Why do you think that is?
Because they don't want to do anything. They don't want to do anything. You're asking the Justice Department to investigate themselves. They're not going to do it.
Does anyone really believe that FBI lawyer changed that document all on his own? Somebody had to give him that instruction. We know somebody gave the instruction to the FBI agent not to close down Mike Flynn's case when the law said you should close it down. Now we have a dual justice system. There's a Department of Justice for everyday Americans who get punished, and there's a Department of Just Us.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for, colluding with the Russians, is what they themselves were doing. Not just the Democratic Party and their operatives, but also the FBI.
The Inspector General report on the FISA abuse and the Russia investigation was about the most damning IG report in the history of the United States. And it showed everything we had done and said was true. There isn't any information, because if there actually was, we would have heard about it by now. And the reason there isn't any information or evidence to suggest the Trump campaign coordinated or conspired or colluded with the Russian government is because they did not.
These guys have perpetrated the greatest crime against the American people ever seen. It was a coup d'etat. It was the attempt to take over a duly elected president for their own personal gain.
They made an attempt to overthrow the outcome of a presidential election. That was an American coup. You can't do with the coup d'etat that takes place in Africa or Latin America, where you seize the building of the presidency and you say, I'm the president. Some officials in the political police, the secret police, they are the ones who control the security machinery, and they say, my God, we have discovered that the president is a foreign agent, so we have to arrest him to save the country. If the people in charge of guarding the state choose to turn against the state is defenseless.
This is what third world security states do. They spy on their political opponents like this. They try to send them to jail. They try to bankrupt them.
Once you establish this precedent that, you know, the intel agencies oversee the presidency, and if the American people make a mistake by electing the wrong guy, then it's up to them to correct that mistake. And the fact that people think like that in these agencies, I think poses a fundamental threat to democracy.
To me, this really is the crime of the century when you think about it. When you think about all these different institutions working in concert, colluding, all working towards one goal, to take out the President of the United States.
So I tried to say this was going to be bad and warn people, and I thought I had a good grasp of how bad it was going to be, and I didn't. If you had told me in December or January, as the administration was coming in, Flynn won't last a month because of an op that the deep state is going to run against him, I would have said, come on, it's bad, but it's not that bad. And then it happened. So, just to show you how good my judgment is.
I would say that Russiagate has been the most egregious, malevolent abuse of everything that was supposed to have been good about our government.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence. It's given people who are bad faith actors a license to do whatever they want because they literally feel like they're fighting Russian spies and Nazis and foreign bad actors. If you are right-wing and you're a reporter or a politician, you will have your reputation destroyed. That's if you're lucky. If you're lucky, you'll only have your reputation smeared. If you end up like some other people, you're going to get framed for crimes.
I worry that that is the future of American politics. Personal destruction at the candidate level and the party level is one thing. When it starts getting down to everyday lives, how do you get your reputation back after that? The change in tactics now is anyone who dares speak up and meet the enemy risks the possibility that they will have a false reality launched against them to destroy their reputation and to silence them. And I think that can't be what our founding fathers intended when they created this great democracy and this great constitutional republic.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized to go after perceived domestic enemies. And that's very scary and bad. It means we don't live in the United States of America as any of us would like to understand it. I don't live in that country anymore. The realization of that is maybe the saddest thing I've ever gone through in my life.
It's not just that we're not the United States anymore, it's what is your humanity? What kind of a human being are you if you are essentially a slave? If you are run by intelligence services, if you're run by the press, if these are the people who dominate your public sphere, if these are the people who make decisions about how you live, about how your family lives, about how your friends live, these are the things that you have to contest all the time if you wish to stay a free person and a free people.
It's time for people to recognize that they've got to stand up and push back on the media, demand unbiased coverage, out those people who are advocates and not real journalists, and tell your neighbors, tell everybody in your social media circle that we are the greatest country in the world, that we have the greatest system. We may not be perfect, but our system is perfect, and we know how to fix problems if we just follow the rules.
If I were writing about the time frame that we lived in and that we're living in now, I would say it wasn't supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to know.
You know, had Hillary Clinton won, we wouldn't have known the different crimes and abuses committed by rogue law enforcement officials or dirty cops, rogue intelligence officials as well. That's true, except you needed something else. Had it not been for Congressman Nunes, had he not been willing to do this, and had he not had this particular team with Kash Patel, with Jack Langer, we would not have known what had happened.
He stood up to the mob. He didn't go along with the narrative. He thought the narrative that the Trump people had colluded with Russia was wrong, and he stood up and he said so at a time when nobody else was willing to do that.
History has already exonerated Devin Nunes in many ways because he stuck to the facts. All right, it was an unpopular storyline, but he was right.
Without Nunes, we wouldn't know, we might not know anything about it. I mean, they basically have gotten away with it scot-free, which is sad because the system doesn't work, but at least it's been exposed. And without him, it wouldn't have.
Why is moral courage among members of Congress the type of moral courage that Devin Nunes has? Why is that rare? Well, it's rare in Congress because it's rare in the world. It's a rare trait. To go against a mob, Aristotle had called moral courage the chief of all virtues, because if you don't have courage, then you can't be honorable, because sometimes to be honorable and honest, you have to speak out against lies, you have to stand up for the truth.
That is exactly right. Every Republican, senator, and member of Congress should be saying, this is over. We want every damn bit of evidence that every intelligence agency has, or it's maybe time to shut those agencies down.
React to this verdict is former California Congressman and CEO of Trump Media and Technology Group, Devin Nunes. Devin, good to see you, and thanks so much for coming back on. This bomb essentially went off, metaphorically speaking, earlier this afternoon. I spoke with Joe DeGeneva earlier about this one in Victoria, Tunsing, where they actually called this earlier. They said they thought he may be acquitted. Reason being, they cited a D.C. jury, a D.C. court, a D.C. judge. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sad as we all had great hopes for this. We all want to see justice served. But look, in Washington, D.C., I spent nearly 2 decades there. You know, the place is getting worse and worse, and it's moving far and farther to the left. And I believe what the defense successfully did is they painted this as a anti-Trump thing. So in other words, well, Sussman was doing all these bad things. Sure, Hillary Clinton was doing these things, but, you know,
Donald Trump, this was all about Donald Trump, and, he should have never been president, et cetera, et cetera. And, that you even had the defense calling this on the closing arguments last week, that this was all a conspiracy theory. And the reality is you're damn right, it was a conspiracy, but it was a conspiracy done by Hillary Clinton. So, look, where do we go from here? Clearly, we're disappointed. This is not what any of us wanted to see as somebody who, it was our investigation that unearthed all of this, that then led to Horowitz, that, who also found all this very damaging information. And here you have an acquittal by a jury with Durham's first prosecution. I will say that the next indictment is going to be tried in Virginia. So I think what we learned in the Sussman trial, there was a lot of new information that came out of that. And it'll be surprising if you get the same kind of tainted jury pool that you had in D.C. in Virginia. And also, we don't know if there's more indictments to come down the pipe from Durham, because it sure seems like with all the evidence that he produced at this Sussman trial, there should be more indictments on the way.
Yeah, great point. Devin, I was surprised, perhaps, that Durham's response and reaction was very, very measured. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I think that prosecutors have to be. You have to remember everybody from the Biden White House to the Attorney General to everyone in the swamp there. They want this Durham investigation to go away. So I think Durham has to really abide by kind of the code of conduct, so to speak, that U.S. attorneys have to abide by. So I think if he was to come out and say anything other than he's disappointed, anything I think more than that, they would go after him for being politically charged, promoting the conspiracy. You can write the storyline that the fake news media would love to create here. So I think Durham played it exactly right. He did what he had to do. He had to bring this case in D.C. He knew it was going to be a jury that was going to be against him. But at the same time, he's got to be careful, I think, what he says on the outside, because there's potentially many more indictments on the way, not to mention you have this trial coming up in September-October timeframe against the so-called source of the Steele dossier.
Really quick.